Okay, so we get a lot of requests for ESOL, and many of you need this test for a variety of reasons. And the test used all over the country is the Praxis ESOL, or English Speakers of Other Languages, and the number is 5362. Now, you know, I'm going to send you over to the blueprint. I want to take a look at this blueprint and test specification before we get started, but we are going to jump right into some questions. But of course, the blueprint is going to help you a lot. Right here on page 5, you can see the overall blueprint. You can see that there are 6 content categories. The first is Foundations of Linguistics, right here. We have 18% of that. Then the bulk of the test comes from Foundations of Language Learning, Planning and Implementing Instruction. Right there is 55% of the overall exam. So that's going to be the bulk. And then we get down to Assessment and Evaluation, Culture, and then Professionalism and Advocacy. This is a straight up multiple choice test. There is no rating on this test, so you just have to work through the selected response, or also known as multiple choice. So that's 1 minute per question. And don't worry, that sounds like not enough time, but you'll be able to bank some extra minutes as you're working through some of the easier questions, so you have time to spend a little bit more of those minutes on harder questions. So don't worry about that. You have plenty of time, and by the time you're done with this video, you'll be even more prepared. Now let's go down to the test specifications here. Remember, this is very, very important. Everything under the test specs is fair game. So Foundations of Linguistics you have here, and then you have all of this information here. Remember, you need all that information. You have to understand all of that information, and it's done that way through all 6 content categories. You can see very specific here, right? So that's very important that you understand each one of these specifications for each section. Then we have the practice test here, and I really like ETS's practice test because they have very good questions, and they have something really important, which are the answer explanations. Now we're going to get into a few of these questions because I think the questions on this exam, they really have a lot of commonality. Like, there are certain things that if you know for this test, you can answer a lot of different questions, and you can be ready for any question you're asked in any different way. So we're going to talk about that in just a second. Now, one of my favorite parts of the study companion is the study topic section, which I will always tell you to go to. It's at the back of the study companion, and most people skip this part. But you can see that it has the test specifications all broken up, and the different things of the test specifications, like here, understands phonetics, stress, and intonation patterns. But then it gives you more specific things to look at. Correctly identify stress syllables, rising and falling, intonation, things like that. Then you can see here, like for F, understand semantics and how combinations of words convey meaning. Remember, semantics, the M is meaning. And then it gives you these examples here. Please do this part. These are actual test questions. These examples will show up on test questions, so it's really important you do that. And then this is another part I love. They have discussion questions. So they straight up ask you, what is communicative competence? You'll definitely have a question on communicative competence. And then, you know, it's got International Phonetic Alphabet. You will definitely have a question on that. So these study companions and these study topics here all the way down, look at all these awesome questions. These will help you to be successful on the exam. The test maker wrote this. The test maker is telling you these are the questions that you should be thinking about when you're studying. So that's what I would do first and foremost. Beyond anything else, this is the best document you can possibly have in your toolkit. All right, so dissect this thing. It should be your Bible because it is the test. All right. Now, beyond that, we do have practice test questions, which I know you guys love, and we're going to go through that now. And I'm going to show you how to break these down so you understand more about the test just by looking at the test questions. All right, so let's go through some practice test questions, and these come directly from the ETS Study Companion. I'm going to break them down in a way so you understand more about the test by looking at these and the answer choices. So let's take a look at number 1 here. Now, you know that I always want to start here at the answer choices. I always work backwards. And I can't really do anything much with the answer choices right now because this looks like we're giving a definition or a specific thing. And I can't just eliminate bad answers here because there are no bad answers or good answers right now. In other ones, you will be able to do that, but for this one, we have to just read the question. An ELL approaches the ESOL teacher and says, "Give me a piece of paper." The EL's utterance is best characterized as an error in. So the student walks up and says, "Give me a piece of paper." Is that how we talk to teachers? Probably not. We usually would say, may I please have a piece of paper? Can I have a piece of paper? But give me is usually not the way you talk to the teacher. However, the student is learning English and is learning different ways in which we use language in a social situation. So in this case, let's take a look at A and get rid of it here. Article usage. Well, what are articles? Articles are a, an, and the. And it looks like it's used correctly here. Give me a piece of paper. The article in the sentence is used correctly, so I can cross that off. Then we have word order here. Well, the words are in the proper order. I mean, the sentence makes sense just the way it is. So I'm going to cross that off. Let's look at C, register. Now, register has a lot to do with whether it's formal or informal language, all right? So register is going to be the proper answer here because this give me a piece of paper is way too informal to be speaking to a teacher that way, right? In our society and in most societies, you speak to teachers with a little bit more respect than ordering them around. Now, this student is not trying to be rude, and this is where language differences can be really hard on students. So we want to be sure that we're understanding that this student is just learning English. We're not going to get upset with the student because the student is just learning how to say these things. But over time, the student will understand that we will use more formal language when speaking with a teacher, and that's when the student gets his or her register correct, right? Now, we can cross off D for conjugation because conjugation has to do with verbs. And in this case, give me a piece of paper is used correctly. The register may be off, but it is used correctly. If it said something like given me a piece of paper or gave me a piece of paper or gives me a piece of paper, where the conjugation of the verb is incorrect, then you would choose D. But in this case, we're looking at formal versus informal ways of addressing the teacher, and register is the correct answer there. All right, let's take a look at number 2. Let's look at the answer choices. We have deductive reasoning, extrinsic reinforce, affective filter, and self-regulated learning. Can't do much yet. Let's take a look at the question. Which of the following terms refers to how the level of a language learner's negative feelings, it's about feelings, and motivation correlates to his or her ability to acquire new language skills? All right, we're talking feelings, we're talking motivation here, okay? Very, very important. Now, whenever you're talking about feelings, this is the affective domain, all right? I want you to understand this. This is actually brought up in the PE test as well. The affective domain is how we feel about ourselves in our learning, in sports, and things like that. Like on the PE exam, there's the affective domain, there's the psychomotor domain. The psychomotor domain is physical. The affective is emotional, or in terms of motivation and how we feel. The same thing goes here. The affective domain is a big part of learning a language because it has to do with your security in speaking to other people, how you feel. Are you motivated to use that language? Do you feel stupid when you speak English? You know, some people feel like, oh, I don't speak correctly. So all of those things are have to do with the affective domain. Now, let's get rid of the other ones so you know what those are. And this is why it's really important to take a look at the answer choices here. Just like I did in question number 1, you don't want to just go, oh, it's the affective filter and move on. Let's analyze these other ones here because understanding the answer choices will help you understand more about the test. Because who knows, answer choice A here might be the answer to another question on the exam. So what is deductive reasoning? Okay, deductive reasoning, when it comes to learning a language, deductive reasoning is when you're given kind of a general statement or a general activity and you, the learner, do the activity. So for example, if I said something like, here is a grammar worksheet. I want you to identify 3 errors in grammar in this particular paragraph. That's deductive reasoning. I gave you kind of a general information and you're going to deduce the information from there. Now there's another type of learning called inductive learning. And that's where I just kind of give you an activity and you yourself kind of analyze things and find things out and maybe say, oh, you know what? I noticed there's some errors here. That's where you're more inquisitive. It's more learner-centered rather than teacher-centered. Deductive is teacher-centered. I give you the activity, I tell you exactly what to do, and then you do it. Inductive is more inquiry-based. You're going in and figuring things out on your own. So that's not what has to do with what's going on here. Extrinsic reinforce means that it's an extrinsic reward. So if I said something like, if you speak English in class and you get your conjugated verbs correct, you get a piece of candy. Okay, so it is a reward. It's extrinsic, meaning it's external. I'm giving you an external reward. Typically, extrinsic reinforcements are not the best answer choice here. On these exams, typically we want to choose intrinsic motivation so that the student is doing it because he or she wants to get better, not because they get a piece of candy, okay? So we're going to cross off B. We did say C is correct, the affective filter. And then D is incorrect. Self-regulated learning has to do with looking at oneself, maybe doing a self-assessment, kind of figuring out why you got things wrong and why you got things correct. And you're regulating your own behavior, your own, speech and things like that. That's not really what's happening here. We're talking about negative feelings and motivation. Now, D might be the distractor. That's kind of close to the answer, but the affective filter is best because affective has to do with feelings, has to do with motivation. So C is the correct answer. Number 3, let's take a look. Now, this is one of those long questions here with a big old scenario and then long answer choices here. So I'm going to start with the answer choices first so I can eliminate any bad words and zero in on good words to try to narrow down my choices. A, was the ESOL teacher who designed the assessment fluent in more than one language? Okay, we don't really need people fluent in more than one language. In fact, you can be an ESOL teacher and only speak one language. It's about teaching students how to use their skills and learn a new language. So A is out. B, will students need a high level of socio-pragmatic competence to complete the assignment? All right, socio-pragmatic competence is kind of, I wouldn't say it's a good word, it just is a big part of ESOL or ESL. So I'm going to leave B because we know we want students to have socio-pragmatic competence. I'm going to talk about what that is in a second. C, are the scores that the student received on the assessment in the past reliable? Okay, reliable has to do with, does the assessment measure the same thing over and over again when given at different times? I don't love it, I don't hate it, but I'll leave it. D, do the assessments separate content area learning from language learning? Okay, content area learning is actually like science, social studies, things like that. And language learning is, how to use the verbs, subject-verb agreement, L1 versus L2, language 1, meaning your first language versus language 2, your second language. So I'm going to leave D. So right now, really all I've eliminated is A. Let's go up to the question stem. Which of the following is the most appropriate question for Mr. Lewis to use as a guideline when screening assessments for cultural bias? All right, right away, notice I don't even have to read the rest of the question. I know the answer. Cultural bias in assessments have to do with socio-pragmatic competence. Now, let's just take a look at some key things here. Socio. What does socio have to do with? Society, right? Isn't that close to culture? Now, socio-pragmatics are ways in which we use language in context, right? So if I said something like, man, that situation really did her in. She was just done after that. Now, when I say that in English, you know what I'm saying. She was overwhelmed by the situation. She quit. She was like, I'm done, whatever. But if you're learning a new language, you may not get the context, like that really did her in and she was done. You might think done is like finished a task, not done like I am done, I'm over it, I'm out of here kind of deal. So that's another way in which socio-pragmatic competence comes in, because not only do you have to know the language, but you have to understand the context of all this crazy stuff. Also with that are idioms, things like it's raining cats and dogs. If you go to another country and you're like, it's raining cats and dogs, they're going to be like, raining cats and dogs, like what are you talking about? Those are things that we've developed in our language over time in terms of society and different sayings and things like that. So B is definitely the best answer here. Now, the reliability of the scores doesn't really have anything to do with what's going on here. And do the assessments separate content learning from language learning? That has nothing to do with cultural bias. When we're screening tests for cultural bias, we want to make sure that we are in fact assessing language and not assessing students' understanding of our society or our culture. Some other things you might see in this area are reading passages that are focused on kind of America-centered activities, right? So if you have students coming from other countries and you've got a passage about the 4th of July or other kind of American-centered things, they may not have the proper context to answer those questions. And so in that case, you are assessing their cultural understanding over their language. So we have to be very careful. And that's why we would evaluate this particular assessment for cultural bias. Let's read the rest up here just to make sure we answered it correctly. Mr. Lewis, a new ESL teacher, is evaluating several assessments that were used by the previous ESL teacher. Because of the diverse cultural backgrounds of his students, Mr. Lewis wants to ensure that the assessments he chooses incorporated into the curriculum do not exhibit any cultural bias. Again, we've got cultural bias, and B is going to be the ticket there. So notice that I worked backwards. I was able to eliminate some bad words in A. Then I just read the question stem. Then I was able to zero in on B because I remembered that's socio-pragmatic. Work backwards, use good words, bad words. And when you're hit with these scenario questions, they end up becoming the easiest types of questions on the exam. All right, so number 20, you can see here that we have a pretty long scenario and then we have some pretty long answer choices. I'm going to start with the answer choices first so I can narrow some things down and kind of reduce the amount that I have to read. Let's go with A. Provide Hassan with a study guide that includes all topics discussed in class. Now look, we have this all topics here. Remember what I say about strong language. You're going to provide him with a study guide on all topics discussed in class. Seems like a lot. I don't know. I'm going to cross it off. Don't love it. B. Supply Hassan with an English dictionary and a thesaurus to use during activities. Okay, we definitely use those things when we're teaching English language learners, but can you just see Hassan fumbling around with like a thesaurus and like while he's trying to interact with his peers? I think B is kind of out unless, something else happens in the question, but I'm going to cross it off. C, having Hassan use pictures and gestures when interacting with others. Okay, I like C because when we teach ESOL or when we teach English language learners, we definitely use pictures, and it says here, use pictures and gestures when interacting with others. So gesturing, body language, nonverbal cues. So I like that. D, setting the expectation that Hassan must respond in English when called upon in class. Oh no. Always eliminate English-only answers. Studies show that a bilingual educational approach is the most effective, and that's where we nurture the L1 while learning the L2. Let's talk about that really quickly here. L1 is the first language. So no matter what the student's first language is, that is L1. So if a student is coming from Guatemala, well, there's several different languages spoken in Guatemala, but let's just say the student's first language is Spanish. L1 is going to be Spanish. L2 would be English, right? Because we're teaching the students second language as English. Now, the philosophy should be, because the research supports it, that supporting that L1 language is very, very, very important. We do not want you to abandon L1. And that's what this English only response here in D is promoting, that I basically say, forget your first language, you need to be speaking in your second language at all times. Not only does this cause the learner stress and freak the learner out, it also is ineffective because we want to make sure we're nurturing the skills in L1 so the student can apply those skills to L2. So anytime it says to abandon L1, you want to cut that. And anytime it says to nurture or to support L1, those are going to be good answers on this test, okay? So that's why I would cut D. Now let's read the question stem and see if we can just go with C and move on, but it looks like C is my answer without even having to read the question. The question stem here, which of the following instructional strategies would most appropriately assist Hassan increasing his communication skills? So when we talk about communication, we have gestures here and pictures. That looks awesome. Now, communication skills. Is a study guide going to help a student with communication skills? No, I can definitely cross that off. Is a dictionary and a thesaurus going to help him? Fumbling around with a dictionary, even with an electronic dictionary on your phone, they do have some pretty cool apps that work pretty well. But in class, is that going to really help Hassan? No. C is definitely a good answer, and D is always out. So I got C as the answer without even having to read the question. Let's go ahead and just read the top so we know what's going on here. A first grade teacher recently welcomed a new EL named Hassan to the classroom. Hassan's records show that he has limited exposure to English classes in his home country. So he does not know very much English at all and is currently functioning at the beginning level. Well, there's more clues right there. Is a study guide in English going to help this kid? That's like giving you a whole bunch of information in another language. Are you going to be like, oh, got it, no problem? No, you're not going to understand it. And even the English dictionary and thesaurus is not going to help him because he doesn't have any English exposure. So the only way to kind of start to help the student understand the second language is going to be to use pictures and gestures, because gestures are sometimes universal and pictures are universal. So C is the best answer there. Now, since we talked about kind of the stages in the last question, I just want to go over the stages of language acquisition for EL students. Some states call them ELL students, English language learners. Some states call them EL students, English learners. Either way, these are students who are learning a second language, and we are here to support them, to love them, to nurture them, not to force them to speak English, not to be, nasty to them. We are here to give them all the support they can possibly need, because learning a new language is hard. Picture yourself being plopped in the middle of a new country in a school with hundreds, sometimes thousands of students who are completely different from you. How are you going to feel? Nervous, stressed, anxious, all of those things. So we want to be here to support these students. So let's go through the stages here so we understand a little bit more of what these kids are going through. So stage 1 is the pre-production stage, and this is often called the silent period or the silent stage. In fact, I follow this ESL person on Instagram, and she writes all these really cool sketch arts, and she just did a really cool sketch art on the silent period. And when a student is in this period, leave the student alone. Do not say, okay, answer this question and put the student on the spot. Do not ask the student to read aloud. Let the student kind of sit back, absorb what's going on, kind of start to figure things out. You definitely want to talk to the student, support the student, but we don't want to be in the realm of like making the student speak in English, like, oh, just try. The student may be embarrassed. Let the student be silent if the student wants to do that. So this is pre-production. Student is just kind of checking things out, completely freaked out, does not want to speak right now. Then we get into early production, which is what Hassan in the last question was in. Okay, now this can last up to 6 months. And the biggest thing about early production is going to be that students at this stage will use pictures. Early production is all about using pictures. They kind of are getting an understanding of the language a little bit, but they're associating gestures and things like that with pictures. You'll notice like around an ESL room, there will be a picture of a door, or the door will be there with the translation of what the door is in whatever language the student is learning, those types of things. So using that in early production is very helpful. Then we have the third stage, which is speech emergence. So this is where students start to communicate. They've got some vocab, about 3,000 words during this stage, and they start to develop comprehension in the new language, L2. Remember, that's the second language they're learning. In this case, it's going to be English because it's a school in the United States, and that's going to be L2. If you were going over to France from here, your L2 would be French, right? Your L1 would be English, L2 would be French. But in this case, we're teaching students who are learning English, so L2 is going to be English. And you can see that they're starting to get it, starting to emerge, speech emergence. Then we get into intermediate fluency. Now things are really cooking. This is stage 4. Student is having a robust vocabulary in the second language. Students begin to communicate effectively in their writing and speech. Now, this is very important. While the student may be able to communicate effectively in his or her writing or speech, Timed reading tests and timed writing tests are still going to be difficult. And some of you may be feeling this too. I have a lot of English language learners as students, teachers who are trying to become certified, and you are required to read for time or write for time, and you know how difficult that could be. So remember that even if the student is in intermediate fluency, writing for time and reading for time can still be very difficult. So again, patience, understanding, that kind of thing. And then we're into advanced fluency, and this is where the student's proficient in comprehension. And look at this could take up to 4 to 10 years. The laws right now are like by year 3 in Florida, they're like by year 3, the student should have it and you can test the student. If the student comes into the 3rd grade and he or she's only been here 1 year, they're exempt from the test, right? Or they get accommodations or whatever. But after that, they have to do it, right? And it's just like, you got to give people time to learn a new language, but what do I know? Anyway, so this is the stage of language acquisition, the stages of language acquisition. You want to take a look at this. You'll see these stages pop up in a lot of different tests. You'll see them on the 5002, the English Language Arts for elementary ed. You'll see them on the reading exams, the reading specialist and things like that. In fact, this table is in almost all of our books when it comes to English, reading, writing, anything like that. This is going to be in there. So be on the lookout for these stages when answering questions on the exam. All right, and now for our last 2 questions. I love this question. It's in the study companion. I really like it. It's very well written, and it kind of shows the differences in skills that I want to talk to you about when we're working through this. Now, a lot of people would get freaked out by this. There's a picture here, there's a scenario here, there's a long situation here, and then we're here, right? But we always want to work backwards and think about our ESOL skills while we're doing it. So let's start with the question and what we're being asked to do, okay? So it says, which of the following best describes the primary focus, that means the main thing happening in this activity? And then we have introducing onomatopoeia, connects phonemes and graphemes, that means sounds and writing. It develops phonemic awareness. Okay, we know that is sounds only. And if you don't know that, make sure you go to my teaching reading playlist. I'll link it up so that you know exactly what I'm talking about, but that's going to be really important. And D, it improves translation skills. All right, so we've got this situation here. Let's go to the bottom part of this. Finally, Mr. Lambert asked the class to share which sounds they recognize in the word be, and he moves on to the next picture on the worksheet. So we have sounds here. So I'm looking at phonemes and phonemics. So B and C are in the running here. Onomatopoeia, A here is when we're talking about onomatopoeia, those are words like kerplunk, bang, bam. They are words that show what's happening, right? So that it doesn't look like A is going to be it. And translation skills, I don't think D is it, but let's keep reading. Let's start here now. Mr. Lambert, an elementary ESOL teacher, provides his students with the following worksheet and a handful of plastic tokens. Now we have this. First, Mr. Lambert says the word that names the first picture on the worksheet, B. Then he instructs the students to repeat the word to themselves and segment the word into distinct sounds. Once the students have identified the distinct sounds in the word, they move on, or they move 1 token for each sound. Again, sound, sound, sound. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 times they say sound or sounds in this question. So what do we have here? Well, we definitely have phonemes. So D is out and I'm down to B and C. Well, B has graphemes. Well, graph equals write. Is there any writing going on or any written words here? No, they just have the picture and they have the sounds. So in this case, I can eliminate B and go with C. So notice, we narrowed it down by working backwards. We were able to kind of figure it out. And then the fact that it said sound, 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 sound all the way throughout, and there was no mention of writing, we can easily figure out that this is C. So remember, always work backwards when you're faced with these big questions like this. One more question attached to this particular scenario and graphic here is this here. And I can already tell A, B, C, and D, they're looking for the stages of language acquisition. And we just went over that in our table. Now, Are we going to be kind of in the early stages of language acquisition? I don't even need to really read anything further. I'm going to, because you don't want to just guess. They might be asking a different question. But I can see here, this is definitely not advanced or intermediate fluency. I don't even have to read the question to figure out that this is either going to be early production or speech emergence, and probably early production, because we're not even looking at words. We're looking at pictures and sounds here. So this is very, very early stage. Let me go ahead and read the question. The activity is most appropriate for students in which of the following stages of second language acquisition? This is early production. Didn't we say in early production we use pictures to figure out what's going on? So A is it, because we know our stages of language acquisition, and we know that this is going to be a very beginning stage. And so early production is the best answer here, making 29A. All right, so I hope that helps you with your studies for the ESOL exam. Remember, we don't want to just look at the correct answer. You want to go through those answer choices and learn what the other answer choices mean. That's going to help you develop a better sense of what's going on in this test. Don't just answer it correctly and move on. Take a look and say, okay, why is it not C? Why is it not B? And that's going to really help you do better on this exam. Remember, always reference your study companion and be on the lookout for our ESOL resources down in the description below. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch our video today. Please feel free to comment down below anything that you need clarification on, and give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video today. Also, please consider subscribing and letting your colleagues know we're here. Thank you so much and have an awesome day.